The Push International Performing Arts Festival consistently presents daring works that challenge conventional thinking. This year, it will continue in that tradition with Seeing Double on February 1st and 2nd at the Scotiabank Dance Centre in downtown Vancouver. It's billed as an homage to spooky late-night double features. A Wake of Vultures, an interdisciplinary collective featuring Nancy Tam, Daniel O'Shea, and Connor Wiley, created Seeing Double. Connor Wiley is the lead artist, director, and writer of one of the shows, K Body and Mind. Nancy Tam is the composer and performing sound designer, and Daniel O'Shea oversees performing lighting and projection and technical aspects. The other half of Seeing Double is Walking at Night by Myself. And here, Nancy is the lead artist, director, and sound design performer. Today, I'm joined by Nancy Tam, an award-winning composer. She creates immersive sonic designs and performances that have been shown in many countries, and she's also one of the leaders of the Five Blessings Collective and co-creator of Double Happiness. Thanks for speaking with me, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me, Charlie.
Can we start by talking about your interdisciplinary company, A Wake of Vultures? How did you start working with Daniel and Connor?
Okay, well, we started when we were all studying or graduating from SFU. I was doing my MFA then, and those two were doing their BFAs, but we were very close in age, and we were fast friends, and we had so many common interests, both just in life, but also in art. And it became very apparent that these ideas had to come out somehow. And because our training is interdisciplinary, like all of us kind of hold it within our own private, like solo practices, uh, uh, creation methods, and also works kind of coming from different artistic disciplines, it was very easy for us to find common language and ways of making. And the first work that the three of us all worked on was actually led by Daniel O'Shea, called PKD Work Show. And that work was very seminal in terms of getting us all together and really finding the aesthetic that we keep on returning to, which is a kind of an austere stage picture, and with two performers that are very alike physically, like and dressed exactly the same. So we were somehow onto this thing around like twinning. And you can see that trend throughout Walking at Night by Myself, as well as K Body and Mind. And we were also all really interested in making performance from a design focus standpoint, where the story there isn't like always like a clear narrative. It's not always character driven, but there is a kind of dramaturgy that moves through energetically or through design elements. And for me particularly, that often manifests as audiovisual design.
That's wonderful. And how did you come up with the idea for doing a double feature at the Push Festival?
Well, a couple of things. One is that both shows, well, all three of us are hugely influenced by movies, film. And we love going to the movies. We watch movies together a lot. It's also just a form that is so prevalent and comes with its own idiomatic grammars that I think is just like in the culture and in the way that we perceive. And that influences the way that we watch stage work as well. And so as stage work or stage performance makers, it just felt like, oh, these grammars, like how do we take these ways of making and put them on stage. And then kind of going further and go, well, what are other ways that we can do that? So the double feature is a borrowed presentation model from cinema. And particularly, I think both of these shows have a kind of late night feel to it. And so this late night double feature just feels right. And also I like that for me, the late night double feature seems to harken back to an older time in the past. And these two works are kind of within the realm of speculative fiction, but there's also this kind of like almost like neo or retro utopism somehow. And so there's this like new and old thing that's happening that I think formally makes sense to present as a double feature. And then the other side of it was that Walking at Night by Myself was slated for a run at the Montreal Arts Intercultural in Montreal in 2020. And the same year, we were billed at the Bendigo Festival for Experimental Sound and Music. And of course, we all know what happened there. And so these two really huge opportunities were, like sorely missed. And so coming out of it, and K Body Mind too was in production. It was picking up. We were going to put a lot of energy into that show, and that I'll let Connor talk about that show. But coming out of it, we really wanted to have like a concerted effort to like put these out there. And because we operate in such a way that like we have very close collaborators that work with us throughout many years. And so our team is actually quite small and nimble. And for that reason, it felt like, oh, we can actually do it. Like we can actually have two shows and like offer it in this way that feels economically viable and also that works with the themes and the ways that we are building these shows.
Well, I'll interview Connor about K-Body in Mind. So you're the lead artist on Walking at Night by Myself. What was the basic premise before you started developing this work?
Basic premise was that I have a walking practice. And I've had one for a long, long time. I've made quite a few works with walking as a primary mode of presentation and perception and performance. And for a long time, I was doing night walks by myself. And I would go out at like 10 p.m. and come back at 2 a.m. And
In Vancouver?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But also like, when I'm traveling, like just like I go out and walk and it's a very different, I mean, walking is a different experience of like perceiving the city or anywhere really, right? Like if you think about, I was recently in Detroit and I was like, I had no idea like where it was very hard for me to orient myself. It was very hard to know the size of the city because when you're traveling in a car or like any kind of quicker way of transportation, biking maybe is a little bit better because you're still like connected. You're like using your body to like exert to go somewhere. So you have an idea of like, oh, I get, this tired maybe. But sitting in a car or a plane or boat, it's like a transporter. Like it is transported, but like you're kind of like, I don't know, the feeling is like I like teleport to one place and then I bop over to another place. Like you really don't have this embodied way of perceiving the city, whereas like biking or walking does. And so when I realized that, like, by traveling slowly, that I was able to catch all these compositions that were just happening. And also nighttime is a very interesting, and also the fatigue, like during those hours, I think is a very interesting experience. That it opens my perception, and also alone too, and as a very petite person. Um, I just love the feeling of being like really curious about my surroundings. And then because of that, was able to like be privy to all these beautiful performances that were happening, right? Like headlights sweeping across under a bridge, and then the pillars of the bridge became these like lines that move across, like beautiful. And because of that, I have like spots around the city, like different tunnels, bridges, fields that are like my favorite places to go and watch.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering what kind of mood you were trying to create with this work.
Well, part of the big part of it is also like optical illusions.
Yeah, well, I noticed when I saw the trailer, it's really quite interesting to see the two figures and yeah. I'll let you
Yeah.
talk about it though.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think confusion is a big one for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, confusion is seeing it as a generative device, generative creative device. Because I think confusion and curiosities are so closely tied. But I feel like confusion has a negative connotation, whereas like curiosity has a positive one. And I'm interested in how close I can get those two concepts to touch each other, and how it can kind of go from curiosity to confusion and back. And as just like an aesthetic, that I like slow transitions. And in making this piece, like I was really considering every moment is a transition, that we like don't land. And just to mimic this idea around like constantly moving through.
It's
Um,
interesting you say this, Nancy, because it makes me wonder whether you see, this sense of confusion could be also characterized as disequilibrium. And if you see disequilibrium almost as a necessary component of curiosity, that you have to be comfortable with being in that state in order to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's this writer that Willem Flusser, who puts forth this like, aesthetic continuum. He proposes it, right? Like where, new things to us feels, it's like ugly because we don't understand it as unfamiliar. And then we kind of go through and you're like, okay, I guess it's like, it's interesting. And then it goes through to like, I like it. And then to like, oh my God, I love it. And then it goes to like, absolute sublime. And then it goes to like, and it oversaturates and it becomes kitschy. And then it falls out of fashion. And then it comes back around and it becomes like, oh, what is that? We see that all the time, right? We see that in fashion, we see it in all kinds of trends, right? That's why the clothes that fit me when I was a teenager are now in style again. And I think that's a key part of like understand and just being in the wave of it, and accepting that, it is a way of disorienting as well. And like internally, I think our compass of like what I like, what I don't like, what I know, what I don't know. And as a sonographer and a sound designer, that's, I would say, is like my main goal all the time, is to kind of shake people up and go like something that I say with the vultures all the time is like, I don't want to take anything for granted, meaning like I don't want to take any of the forms that we employ for granted, any of the content, people coming, but also like simply like don't take the fact that like the ground is level for granted. I want folks to kind of go, well, am I shaking, or is this, are they like, that's kind of the the way that, I want to, in a fun, hopefully, a fun way
And how can you
of,
deploy sound to achieve this objective too of ensuring that people aren't taking things for granted, even their
oh,
surroundings?
I'm so glad you asked. I do it all the time in my so I specialize in live perform multi-channel sound design, which means that it is what folks would call immersive. I would just call surround sound. And it, is so if you think about traditional proscenium, usually we think about it as like, speakers front on, but then it's actually also very prevalent in like cinema, but also in just traditional theater that you would have speakers all around. The thing that I like doing a lot within this form of presentation is moving the sound around, but also with techniques of volume matching and also with tuning the room, as I call it, of figuring out what frequencies are naturally resonating in the room, playing with that, what sounds are actually existing in each performance environment, and then feeding that back into the space itself. It's very disorienting because it feels like you don't know if things are actually happening or not. And I mean by that sound is action, because you can't have sound without action, right? It's friction in the air. So something has to move. And because of that, sound is also material. And because of that, like sound is distant touch. It is distant touch. And so in this way, if we take all of these ideas together and then apply these techniques of moving the sound around and not only mimicking the sound itself that exists in the space, but also other characteristics, as I said, volume, speed of movement, reverb, like size of the space. It's very disorienting. And if one is crafty enough, you can really get to a point where the sounds are mimicking so very closely together. I do that all the time, and I do it in all sorts of different
You,
contexts, in
you
different
use
containers and
you
theaters.
use the term because at Loeb Studios they use this term 4D sound. Do you use that term to describe your work, or is it
No,
okay?
no, no. At Lope, they do something different where they are really trying to, well, it's also a very small space at Loeb. And so you are able to have like what they're calling, like audio holographs, right? Because of like the ways that the speaker alignment works together. That's not quite what I do all the time. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Now, A Wake of Vultures is comprised of a mix of settler backgrounds, and your roots go back to Hong Kong.
Mhm.
How do your cultural roots inform walking at night by myself?
Oh, personally, it's yeah, that's a really interesting thing. So I don't. Okay, I'm trying to formulate the way that I want to address this because as a Asian Canadian maker and artist, I get asked this a lot of like anything that I make, and it's an interesting one because I wonder, like, my colleagues have various different backgrounds, like how they interact with this question, but also um I also ask myself this because it's like, would I make this work if I were Danish or
Is it
Polish?
possible?
Like, yeah, I think so. I think it's possible. Um, uh, what I am interested in like in this work that I think speaks to just like a larger idea of this that surrounds this question of like, who am I looking at? And it kind of goes back to this idea around like not taking things for granted, not taking our perception for granted, that you question it. And I wanted to bring that question into this work when you're looking at these bodies who are petite Asian femme bodies.
Mhm.
Now, same can be applied, I think, if you put two Caucasian males on stage. But it
Mhm.
is this, I think when you put that question onto these bodies that we see on stage, it carries a slightly different weight because we encounter that question in different contexts. And I wanted to bring that tension in here.
Mhm.
The other thing that I think about when I get asked that question is like, and I come from a background of like within contemporary concert music as well. So, this idea of like Canadian music or is it Chinese, like it doesn't, it's also in a way of thinking around like artistic traditions as well. So in
Mhm.
this way, like, it's a harder thing because I was raised, artistically within the Western classical traditions, uh, within various disciplines, right? So there's that component of it that I'm also aware of. Um, and then going back to this filmic thing is that like I love horror as a genre, all kinds of like subgenre within. And I've watched a lot of horror movies. And the ones that I love most are, and I'm most intrigued by Asian horror especially. There is a real difference, I think, of the way that the femmes are portrayed between like Western horror versus the Asian horror. There's a lot more of the femme monsters in the Asian horror films, whereas they're not the people running away, they're the people running after you.
Yeah, it's like in Asian folk traditions. The female ghosts are often more terrifying than the male ghosts.
Yes, absolutely. And then the little girl ghosts are the
Yeah.
most terrifying. And I was very intrigued by that. Um, because in like the traditional cultures, like the femme roles are often, uh, the stereotypes, I think, are that, Asian femmes are demure and, subservient and like, but, and, it doesn't come off in this genre. And I love that.
Do you have any theories about why that might be the case?
I mean, the theories that I have are just like from my research of like, this is in a way of like folks of, in those positions revolt.
Yeah. And interesting. Now, you're also part of Five Blessings, and that creates radio plays. What's your role with the collective?
Well, so far I have been leading quite a few projects with that collective. And we don't only make radio plays, we also made a large scale research project and stage work and short film and
Yeah.
a music album with the project Double Happiness Detour This Way, or Double Happiness and then Detour This Way is the stage work. A Little Detour is the short film that is free on its website. And then also my music album, Twin Spirits. And then right now I am leading another nascent work called Have You Eaten Yet, which is an recipe sharing project where we celebrate diasporic culture through culinary and oral traditions.
Mhm. And what are you most proud of as in terms of the work that Five Blessings has done?
Most proud of. I mean, there's so much to be proud of there. I mean, I think in both of these collectives. Well, in Five Blessings, I'm really glad that we're able to um live our values. Like really, I feel like, and I've worked with a lot of different organizations and artists, and it's really hard to live your mandate. And I think we really, really do. And I think we try to complicate this question around diasporic culture as much as possible, and like nuance it and celebrate the nuances. Um, I was just talking to a young artist who also is, you know, part of the Chinese diaspora, but she's just starting to like look into it for herself. And I've encountered this so much, talking with folks and sharing, you know, experiences and sharing these shows as well, and other shows that I make, including Walking at Night by Myself, like as an abstract way of meeting these questions. And she was saying that, you know, she doesn't really know she belongs. There's like a disconnection. And I said to her, like, that actually is a key part of the experience.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with Five Blessings in that, that everyone seems to have a different background in a lot of ways. Like Howard's from Taiwan, and then Jasmine's family came via Taiwan, but from mainland roots there. And then you've got, the Derek's from Hong Kong, but he's been here for a while and he went through Norway, and then you're here. And I'm just wondering, like, being part of this collective, if it's given you a greater appreciation for the diversity within diasporic populations as they go back to Asia.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing of like, I think the appreciation was there before, and that motivated the
Oh, I
forming
see.
of the
Yeah.
collective, right? Like, because for all of us, we didn't wake up one day and go like, oh, look at that Chinese. It's like I was celebrating diasporic culture before it was like this word that everybody knew, because I had to.
Mhm.
You know, this was a fact that I could not escape, that didn't escape me at all, even as a child. And this is the thing that I think a lot of us in the collective was already doing. And it's almost kind of like, welcome to our beautiful club.
Mhm.
You know, and it's so great to be able to share that with people, and it's so great to be able to joyously, and that's, I think, the part, you know, going back to this, like, what am I most proud of? That's what I'm most proud of, that like we are joyously celebrating, that it's not, you know, just like, oh my God, we have it so tough. Like, of course, like we know that. And there's so many other shades of it. And that's a big part of what we try to do. And that's a big part of a year of blessings, is that we wanted to make what we call high squee content work. Squee being like, oh, like it's so cute, you know. I have little nibblings in my life. So I have a nephew, I have a niece, and also, you know, there are kids in my life. And both of my nibblings are white.
Mhm.
And when they were growing up, and I love them so dearly, it never occurred to us that it was, we're a family, so it never occurred to us that it's like any issue at all. But then when I go visit, they live in Montreal, so when I go visit, there's often this like or when they come here, this often we encounter this thing where when the kids, because they're so cute, interact with other people, and then they're like, who is this? Oh, this is my auntie. And like that people kind of get taken aback. And I'm like, when we all get really confused. And that was, those moments are really affirming of going like, yeah, this work still needs to be done. Because I think conceptually we're like, yeah, of course, all kinds of families can happen. Of course, but then when you actually get caught off guard,
Yeah.
that's when we kind of go, oh yeah, no, like actually, how accepted is it, or like how normalized is it? And I think the more that we complicate these issues, and make it palatable, not make it palatable, but just like presenting in all sorts of different ways, because diversity needs to exist in diverse ways.
Mhm. And I'm wondering about like how you decided to become an artist, um, and what led you into this world.
uh I couldn't not be,
Okay.
for various many reasons, but it's like, uh, I think like a lot of folks of my generation, growing up in Hong Kong, because also I'll tie this back into like this like Chinese identity, but because it is really very tied, I think. Um, the education system in Hong Kong at the time, it was so fierce. I mean, I think it's still very fierce today, but it was in this way where like, um, we had to all like interview into not primary school, kindergartens. So at kindergarten age, you have to prep to go to school. You have to interview so you can get into a good kindergarten, so you can get into a good primary school, because then you want to like, so there's that. And then there is this thing around like, you also have to have an extracurricular, so people were either athletic or artistic, right? And so back in 2009, 2008, I went back and I was like looking into this thing around like, why is it that Hong Kong has like one of the highest per capita people like learning piano and learning violin? Well, that's why. And so in a way, like, I was kind of primed for it, but I think my parents didn't really think it would take as it had. And also I was a failed musician. I took it for a number of years and I didn't take it. And then when I got to Canada, I took it again. And and it was, when I got to Canada, the pressure cooker was off. Like it was kind of just for fun, which felt like it was, a different kind of way of enjoyment. But um more than that, it wasn't really about music. It was much more about sound and listening. And I was always much more interested in sounds than music. And well, or the interactions between these two categories. And I remember one of my earliest like sonic experiences was being on the school's yard, like probably within the first months of arriving into, to Canada. The new school knew everything. And I remember like never really been privy to like that much space before.
And can I ask how old you were at that time, Nancy?
I was 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I never really been privy to that much space before. And the school's yard was this cool location, and I don't know if it would exist in this way anymore, but there's the school, huge field, and then it goes up a hill a little bit, and then there's a ditch,
Mhm.
and then there is the railway. like the train
Is
tracks.
this in East Van?
No, this is no. This is in Ontario. I'm from Ontario.
Oh, okay. You're from Ontario. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and this is in Thornhill,
Oh, okay.
Ontario. And so for recess, I would and kind of ditzy and an airhead. I just like would run across this field because I've never been privy to that much space before, and then I'd run up onto this little hill and I'd just sit there and I'd wait for the train because of this like sonic experience. I was waiting for the sonic experience every day. And sometimes like they would forget about me. So I just sit there for hours, you
I'm
know?
wondering whether you've learned any of the Chinese instruments like the erhu or guzheng or anything like that, or do you ever incorporate those sounds into your design?
I've incorporated those sounds into my design. I have not studied them.
Yeah.
And I have not, that's what I mean. It's like my musical artistic upbringing is Western
Yeah, that's
classical.
what I figured it'd be Western given your age
Yeah,
when you came. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And it's
yeah.
well,
Yeah, but just to this question around like how did I come to my artistic experience? It's like from these profound and like mundane, pedestrian, quotidian performances. And that leads back into, I mean, it exists today. It exists in walking at night by myself. That's the thing that keeps coming back.
the thing is, this term third culture is sometimes describes people who are equally comfortable in North American society and then their ancestral homeland.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you fit that mold in many ways because the age that you came, the Cantonese is probably outstanding, and I don't know if you speak Mandarin, but you could swim in North America totally comfortably, and I'm wondering how this kind of being part of this third culture informs your research and performance work.
Oh my gosh, yes, of course. I think the idea of third has been one that I am so interested in. And again, it's in walking at night by myself. Um, just the like this concept, right? Of like um not like one, two, and three as in it's like linear, but that the one and two and the third is the amalgamated, the
Yeah,
hybridized,
it's
thank
almost
you.
like a Venn diagram. They overcook it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that little middle slice, I think, is what I live. It's who it's so much of what I am. And because I have had to be so comfortable in this hybridization that it's so easy for me to apply that way of being and thinking and in all ways into other areas of my life, such as making artistic work. And so the way that I am as an interdisciplinary artist is practice in this hybrid way. Whereas I think there's like so many different ways of being an interdisciplinary artist and multidisciplinary or non-disciplinary artist, all these different things, right? And I see it as like, some folks, they are composers, but they like collaborate deeply with other folks and they contribute their music on, into projects. And that's, the way that they practice interdisciplinarity. And it's all great. The way that I practice interdisciplinarity is in such a way that I'm steeped in, performance making and in music making, and then I combine these strategies to create works that moves through different languages and tropes and genres and to make work that feels like, is this theater? Is this music? And my work has been programmed in, dance context, theater context, music context because of it. And then also just very simply, the optical illusions in walking at night by myself is this thing around the third, the more, which is that, you have a grid that is over another grid that is of very similar frequencies, and our brains and our eyes cannot see the interactions of these two grids without making a third and emergent pattern. And that is also a kind of hybridization, and it keeps coming back. Like again, it's one of these things I feel like I can't escape, and it
It
doesn't
makes me
escape
wonder,
me.
Nancy, like we all have our ancestral knowledge that informs who we are and how we're not always conscious of it. Um, and I'm wondering in your case whether you can discern whether any of these kind of philosophical Eastern traditions, whether it's Taoism or Confucianism or Buddhism, kind of leads you toward interdisciplinarity or influenced you to go to practice interdisciplinarity, as you say, in the way that you do.
Well, I think about flow a lot.
Mhm.
And I've been thinking about it more recently too, of like how um I want to find a graceful way of saying it. There are so many cultural experiences that are wonderful as well as not so wonderful. And I think if one has the privilege and pleasure to grow up and grow old, and this is from every single culture, I'm sure, just like it is a human experience that one has to appreciate both the acceptance and letting go as a cycle. And I say this in tying into cultural experiences because as much as like in Five Blessings that, we celebrate it, but we also know that it's not hunky-dory all the time.
Mhm.
And really this concept of the flow comes back to me, that like everything is in flux, and that we need to almost like, be in tune with the cycles. Um, and I come back to it all the time because it's so hard to do.
Mhm. Yeah. And where do you see your career going from here? Do you have plans for 3 to 5 years? Do you plan your life, or are you somebody who just simply goes with the flow?
Oh boy. Oh, I'm so glad you're asking that question. And in this context, um, again, like I think my generation, like I think it's very different now. Like, kids growing up. I just recently taught a term at SFU, and in one of my classes, it was like I was joking with them. I'm like, man, we have like a whole small army of Asian femmes in here, and it's a music class, and that didn't happen when I was in music school. And growing up, like like art and music is not something that you choose. Like it's like don't choose that. Um, and so I really do, and I think that I don't, and again, like, I also want to pull it out of like, the Chinese context too, because I think that is probably true generationally, you know what I mean? So, and I think it's, as these things are, it's always both and it's always everything and it's always specific as
Oh,
well.
I'm
So,
seeing so many Canadian musicians of Chinese ancestry now. Like there's
yeah,
lots and lots.
yeah.
And and some of them, their mothers are putting them in the Royal Conservatory of Music, but they actually don't like classical music, and then they end up doing what they want to do. And
Yeah. Um, but in any case, I would say that like I'm putting all this in front of what I'm going to say because to answer this question is that like I feel and really truly grateful for the career that I'm having, and that like this is the vision that 16-year-old Nancy wanted.
Mhm.
I'm gonna get emotional because it's so true.
That's
This
wonderful.
is traveling the world, making art.
You've
This
done
is
it.
what, yeah, this is the thing. And so 3 to 5 years, like if I get to keep doing it,
Mhm.
great, and thinking about ancestral history, right? Like my ancestors worked really hard
Mhm.
for me to be here.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take, extra weight on, or whatever, right? Like and truly, like I think there's this funny thing of like, I don't know, I want to be connected to them, but it's also just like, do they want to be connected with me? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
And can I ask Nancy, do you know like where their roots are, say within China? Are they from different provinces or do you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I do know. Yeah. So
And
my
where are
dad's
they,
family is from
where are
Hoi
their,
Ping.
where do your roots go back?
Yeah, so my dad's family is from Hoi Ping, and my mom's family is from Tiuzhou.
Hmm.
And they're both in Tiuzhou is like a water port town, and then Hoi Ping is very interesting place because it's got like these um like Western influenced architecture, and they're like these like long tall buildings, and I really want to go and visit. I've not visited either of these places, but it's really not that long ago that those connections were based in these places.
Hmm.
um yeah.
Well, that's great. So it's a, well, this is wonderful, Nancy. Is there anything I neglected to ask or any other points you'd like to make?
No, I mean, I hope I answered your
Well,
questions
you did great.
aptly. And I know that this is supposed to be kind of toward like answering about my Chinese like identity, and I feel a little self-conscious because I've been thinking so much about this for like my entire existence,
Hmm.
and a lot of it because of being in Western classical structures and traditions, and raised in the time that I was raised. There's also a bunch of erasure or like kind of difficult feelings attached to it. And I gotta say that, like, truly, like, not everything is attached to this identity. And also, I don't want everything to be attached to this
Yeah.
identity, right? So I hope I answered your questions
No,
in ways
it's
that
true. Like,
actually serves what you
yeah, it
want to
does.
do.
You did that. And the thing is we have a multiplicity of identities. We all
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
And I think you can't reduce people to one aspect of their identity, even if
for
it's,
sure.
ethnicity or anything else, or gender or sexual orientation or gender expression. And we have our education, we have our, so you may have something more in common with somebody who might not be Chinese than
Yeah,
somebody who is Chinese.
absolutely.
And but I think what we're doing here is we want to show just the diversity of people and help break down the monolithic thinking, because the monolithic thinking actually is linked to the racism and the anti-Asian backlash, which we've gone through many times in Canadian history. And, this is kind of like a positive response to Trumpism. You
Mhm.
just telling your story, you know? And
Mhm.
and it's your story, it's not my story. So whatever you want to say, you could say it.
Mhm.
Does
Oh,
that
thank
make
you so
sense?
much. Yeah, 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 totally. And thank you so much. And like what you're saying just now is like completely like what the five blessings, you know, that's like our thing, is to kind of go, okay, how do we hold all these
Yeah.
nuances, right?
Yeah. And
So,
you are Chinese, but you're not defined as by being Chinese,
Yeah, that's right.
or at least you're
That's
Chinese
right.
Canadian, I should say.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
at the same time, there are certain things I wonder about, like language, for instance, that if you want to thrive in the arts, in a lot of cases, you need to have a facility with the English language just to get through the grants.
Yes.
Um, and I'm wondering if you've given, as somebody who's kind of bicultural in a lot of ways, or third culture, whether you've given some thought to that, and that how if newcomers to the country who might be very artistic, and we're seeing a wave of people from Hong Kong now, the artists are the ones who are leaving.
Yeah,
They're kind of in a position of disadvantage simply on language and dealing
totally,
with structures that reward language, official languages of Canada. But
totally.
Cantonese has been a language of Canada since the 19th century.
Absolutely.
And I wonder
Yeah,
if you think about these things.
yes, I have thoughts about that. I'm so glad you brought that up because I don't know CCA. I think it's CCA, like, and by that I mean Canada Council of the Arts, as well as BCAC, British Columbia Arts Council. They do not recognize language minority as a point of diversity,
Yeah.
which is so
And it's
crazy.
like 45% of the population is either first or second generation.
Totally.
And then people have to assimilate into English.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I wonder if 20 years, 30 years from now, are all these third culture kids, or ones who maybe were born here, start saying, I've lost my language. I know what Indigenous people went through was far worse in terms of residential schools and being stripped of their culture and all of that. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, we're seeing this, if it's linguistic discrimination or something where, Punjabi is a language of Canada. Cantonese is a language of Canada. Mandarin is a
Mm-hmm.
language of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Farsi is a language of Canada. Korean is a language of Canada.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
if you look at the numbers, and yet in arts and culture,
Mm.
at least in systems and funding, telefilm has made some advances in just the past couple of years. But by and large, this is it's almost like a blind spot.
Yeah, I mean, like, I wondered, I've actually wondered about this. It's like, okay, so if, because the other side of the argument, which is like, like around, I don't know if it's like a really good argument, or like around efficiency, and like we can't possibly, like, kind of push back on that kind of way of thinking of like we can't possibly accommodate everyone kind of way of thinking,
Well,
which
India and
then,
Philippines have lots of languages.
yeah, but I wonder about like, okay, so if that's the case, like, are there systems that can we see this just like part of accessibility? Like, is there a way in which like we can like support that? Because we have ways of supporting accessibilities in other ways, right?
Yes,
So like, are there translators that we can like
maybe.
employ, you
Yeah,
know? And actually, yeah, like the erasure of language is huge. And I will say, like, from Hong Kong, and been following and understand, and I had studied calligraphy as a kid, Chinese calligraphy specifically. And so like really having an appreciation of the written script,
yeah,
and then got really interested actually in language, and
yeah,
because it's the
yeah,
sounds, right? And the complexity of it, and seeing how that, even though there are so many people still practicing Cantonese, it is also declining, it is
yeah. Well, the regional
disappearing.
languages in China are also being wiped out.
Totally.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And the thing about like the Chinese language is that there are so very many dialects because the country itself had been so like there's so many isolated communities, right,
Yeah.
before. And
It's more than
so
100
you could
languages.
drive
Yeah.
20 minutes and people will be speaking a dialect that you wouldn't understand. Now, of course there are difficulties attached to that, right? Like you have like that's kind of an issue, right? Like if you drive 20
Well,
minutes and you have
fortunately, they
no
figured out
idea.
a written language that is standard.
Yeah, sure. But like, there must be ways, I think, that, humanity has come up with to like be able to have ways to hold on to
Yeah.
dialects uh that are practiced by small groups of people. And it's true, like it's not like, that has never been done. It's just like if it is not done,
Yeah.
I think it's a sign of not wanting it to be
Yeah.
done.
Interesting. I'm out of time right now, Nancy, so I have to get going. Thank you for speaking to me. Nancy Tam is the lead artist, director, and sound design performer of Walking at Night by Myself.